I would like to talk about another thing that people are skeptical about. And net zero seems to be one of those things. And yet it seems to be accepted on good faith that it's the road to environmental salvation. And because of that, public and private bodies and actors have started to reorient their focus economically, strategically, toward bringing around a net zero world, whatever that may look like. I don't think it's been fully articulated yet, other than renewable energies are part of it and reducing carbon emissions. You have written about the various risks and trade-offs that sit beneath this that aren't commonly spoken about and might be actually roadblocks to people, or not people, countries actually achieving these goals. So what are those unintended, unseen consequences that aren't being grappled with very well at the moment, Doug?
Well, the main one, I mean, I'm not a sort of an environmental scientist, so I just put that out there, right? And I'm fully on board with the idea that humans contribute to forms of climate change. That seems incontrovertible and settled in that sense. But as far as I understand, I think the debate is mainly around the amount that human activity contributes to climate change relative to solar flares, the El Nino. There's other factors that one has to sort of factor into this process. The second thing I sort of would say is that I think that inherent to a lot of the net zero stuff, and also the broader environmental critique, is ultimately a critique of industrialization and capitalism. And I think if one has to just look at any graph in terms of positive outcomes for humanity, I think that, the vast majority of humanity's existence has been sort of nasty, brutally short, dead by the age of 30, disease, want, squalor, war, tribalism, you name it. It's not been, essentially every day was pretty much calibrated around trying to cram as many calories down your goblet as you possibly could. All right. There's only in the last 150 or 100 years or so, especially post-industrialization, technological innovation that we see, and industrialization has taken off, that we can enjoy the kind of lifestyles on a much broader basis that we have now. And that goes hand in hand with energy. You literally can chart the fossil fuels and industrialization and quality of human life goes like that. So obviously energy is fundamentally primary to sustaining any kind of quality of life. And as far as I understand, the current alternative energy sources to fossil fuels just cannot do that on a mass scale in terms of wind and solar. One hopes, I'm sure, it will develop more and more and more. But there are those kind of more generalized statements out there. But in terms of specifically some of the research I've done, I did a paper on this recently. I'm doing some more research on it now. And that is the net zero energy transition has at its heart new technologies. So solar, EVs, rare earth magnets and stuff like this. And those in turn are very heavily reliant upon what are called rare earth elements, REEs. And the reason, and there's about 17 of these things, but the reason they're so important is because they have all kinds of magnetic properties and heat resistant properties, etc. And these really sit at the heart of the key technology in the net zero transition. Now, these are quite ubiquitous in terms of the environment, rare earths, but the processing of these things is incredibly costly, and often very environmentally damaging, and requires huge amounts of industrial input to get these different types of rare earths, light rare earths and heavy rare earths. So some of the stuff I've been doing on this is looking at the ways in which China, if we buy the idea that we do have an era of great power competition, which we do, there's a kind of US-centered international system and a more Sino-centric international system. And if we buy the idea in particular that China, which has become very strong economically, also has regionally hegemonic ambitions, which it clearly does, especially in relation to Taiwan, and therefore we may have the potential for conflict there. And then the third element of this rare earths, the fact that China has pretty much got a very massive monopoly of rare earths. Okay. The third element of that is that China in the past has used the export of these minerals, these rare earths, to punish states. So, for example, there was an incident with a Japanese trawler and a Chinese naval ship came into conflict in 2010, and China cut off the export of these rare earths. So the main research and stuff that I've been publishing and writing about and thinking about for some time is the fact that our net zero transition is making us very heavily dependent on these rare earth elements. Okay. And as we transition deeper into net zero industrial economies and rely upon these different types of technologies, new technologies, non-fossil fuel type technologies, electric cars, etc., we're going to need more and more of these things. And the main supplier of these rare earths, and we don't have any alternative right now, is China. So we have a very interesting situation. If you think about the 20th century, the centrality of states like Saudi Arabia or OPEC states or the Gulf states in terms of their export of oil, they were strategically dependent on America ultimately to keep them safe, both internally and externally. China doesn't have that strategic dependence on America. So we have a net zero transition. These technologies that are at the heart of that all of which need these rare earths that are primarily processed by China. And it's not just in terms of electric vehicles or wind turbines and stuff like that. It's also very high-tech military kit. So the F-35s the Americans have relies upon huge amounts of these rare earths, most of which come from China. In 2022, the Pentagon had to sign a waiver to allow Chinese rare earths to keep coming into America. They had no alternative to put them to F-35s. So in the event of a war or greater trade protectionism vis-a-vis China, what we ultimately have is the European net zero transition, the new industrial economies are dependent upon a massive China monopoly on these crucial rare earth elements. Again, you don't see much analysis of this. You don't see much thinking about this. But this is a massive national security, but also an industrial problem that we face.
The geopolitics, always overlooked. And what I find interesting when people unpack these is that you start to find out that what are builders' conspiracy theories, when people start to mention when net zero became the thing, that this seems like Chinese propaganda and it benefits the Chinese, as they're very dismissed very quickly as reactionary and perhaps conspiratorial. And the thing is it when you start to hear about it, it becomes much harder not to think that actually there has been some kind of hijacking of economic thought. And I say this having had someone on the show who he's Norwegian, used to be in the forces, and is now part of an organization that sources rare earth metals. And specifically, they're trying to they found rare earth metals that are on the seabeds, and they are around volcanic fissures, and they are apparently quite easy to mine. You use technology, you thus don't need all of the sub-Saharan African labor to be pulling things out of the ground and heavy, dirty, polluting work. And he's found lots of pushback from European politicians and industry bodies, even though he says, look, Norway is ready. We can start pulling this stuff out of the ground. We just need you to help us at an EU level. And he's found a lot of resistance to that. It's almost as though people are just committed to this idea of having these really complex global supply chains. And it makes you wonder, whether that pendulum swings away from that. I mean, we've seen upon the rise of the recent Dutch coalition government, at least kind of nominally headed up by Geert-Wilders, come out on day one, scrap all the energy transition targets that had previously been set around renewable energies and said, look, this stuff isn't going to fix it. We're going to move to nuclear. We'll build 4 nuclear plants. Is that the way for Britain, the Anglophone countries, the other countries that have become too dependent on foreign rivals, or does that also fall under the same issues as we'd need to source from foreign rivals?
Well, I think that again, I'm not an expert on a lot of this technology. I followed some of it, and I followed in terms of energy. But it strikes me that ultimately, if you want to, your economy and the quality of life that you enjoy is fundamentally related to energy. You just can't get around that, right? And unfortunately, the wind turbines don't produce energy when the wind's not blowing. The solar doesn't produce energy when the sun's not shining. We don't have the storage capacity for that yet, right? So then we have to rely upon fossil fuels ultimately as the backups, the intermittent backups, when these clean technologies don't work. Now, and so it strikes me that nuclear or small, and particularly small modular reactors, would be the obvious way to go if we wish to mitigate climate change to the extent that fossil fuels and human activity around fossil fuels is responsible for upping the CO2 content in the atmosphere. But we need to keep the lights on. We need to keep hospitals going. We need to keep food on the shelves, etc. Then one presumes we need a very big, large store or supply of energy, and nuclear power would strike me as the obvious choice for that. But unfortunately, it suffers from this kind of Chernobyl discourse, and nowhere more do you really see that in Germany. If you really want to look to a country that has made such bad mistakes, then Germany really is it. Germany is basically the economic hegemon and the political hegemon within the EU. So where Germany goes, the EU goes. Okay. Categorically, whenever there's a crisis in the EU, you're not getting on the phone to Spain or to to Portugal. You get on the phone to Merkel in particular, but Germany, right? So what Germany's done is decommissioned its nuclear power stations. Okay, got massively into bed. Merkel got massively into bed with Putin to rely upon Putin to supply energy. I mean, that itself was absolutely crazy. Right? Decommissioned its nuclear. So where is it now? Essentially, Germany is going into a massive demographic decline as well. Okay, it's had to import huge amounts of immigrants into the German economy. Number one, it's decommissioned a load of its nuclear power. Its industry can't get the energy it needs. So what are they doing? They've reopened and burning now lignite coal, which is some of the dirtiest coal you could possibly burn because they need the energy. So Germany, that really represents, if that's where the net zero is going to take you, to decommission clean sources of energy and put a knife to your own throat in terms of your industrial capacity and all the attendant effects, negative effects that will have for your population, your employment, etc. And then to scrabble around and say, "Oh my goodness, we're in a terrible tight pickle here," especially with Putin, and then to basically reopen the most dirtiest lignite coal burning power stations, as is the global south. And Modi tweeted the other day, "We've opened yet another lignite coal station." They're proud of this stuff. So the net zero, it sounds, clean. Yeah, that's fine. But if you want industrial civilization to maintain itself, you need huge amounts of energy. So importing French nuclear energy from France, or energy from abroad, which is what we're doing, or LNG from Qatar and from the US, etc. That's what we're doing. So we need more energy. We need nuclear. I think we definitely need small modular reactors. The fact again that we haven't done that, we're not doing that. We're not looking at that, and we're relying upon these untried, quite dodgy technologies that sun don't shine, wind don't blow, you ain't going to get energy. That for me is again symptomatic of the strategic failure of our political class.